Good afternoon and welcome into FSU Weather. It's just after 1 o'clock here, and we are going to give you the latest update on Tropical Storm Idalia. Let's start by taking a look over Campbell Stadium. The skies are getting darker now. We'll take a look at the radar in a little bit, but this is not actually part of the Idalia that we're seeing now. We're starting to see some storms move through Wakulla and into Leon counties. But right now, let's take a look at the tropics as a whole. We'll focus on Idalia here in a second. We've got still an active tropics, so we've got this storm coming off the coast of Africa. It's got 20% of development over the next 2 days and 50% over the next 7 days. We have recently formed Tropical Depression 11, and then we've also got Hurricane Franklin, which is now a Category 4. That is a really strong hurricane, but thankfully it's staying out the water. And then we've got Hurricane Idalia, now a Category 1 hurricane, and we'll take a look at the cone here a little closer in here in a little bit. But let's keep in mind that this storm can follow on either side of this cone. So on one side, it could go a little more towards the Big Bend, whereas on the other, we could be on the western side, we could be looking a little bit closer here in Tallahassee to a landfalling Category 3 hurricane. So let's kind of take an overall look at Idalia as a whole, zoom in and really take a look at the storm. Here it is on visible satellite, churning out in the Gulf of Mexico, trying to get an eye going. You notice a lot of kind of rotation in here, and that is really indicative of it trying to develop some sort of knot. So taking a look at the radar out of Key West, this is kind of a whole outer band of the storm. We'll notice there is a tornado warning here near, I believe that's going to be south of Fort Myers. So just in that area there is a tornado warning. And we're going to be keeping an eye on the radar as we go through the afternoon and evening. But most of the outer bands are starting to work its way into southwest Florida and the Florida Keys. With the spaghetti models, what are we looking at? They are in somewhat tight agreement starting, but the last couple runs of the spaghetti models have been taking us further and further to the west. So when we saw earlier this week some spaghetti models lean more towards the Big Bend, these latest runs of the spaghetti models are bringing it closer and closer to the Big Bend region and closer to Tallahassee. So let's take a look really close at these spaghetti models. A lot of them coming very close to Leon County. We could be having a landfalling Category 3 hurricane here in the Big Bend in the coming hours into the overnight. So what are we looking at? A lot of these models are focusing in on Leon County, and a few, less and less of them are focused on more of central Florida than they are here in Leon County. So we really want to kind of keep in mind that. So let's take a look at this. This is what we call the GFS ensemble. It's basically the GFS, and we're going to change a couple characteristics every time we run it. And by changing those characteristics, it kind of gives us different scenarios of what can occur within the GFS. So the GFS, we're pretty consistent on it coming towards Tallahassee. We're going to be looking at a panhandle impact here in Florida. So what do we mean by that? We mean that the center of circulation is going to be passing pretty close to Tallahassee. So if you're in Tallahassee, now is the time. We've got a few hours left to get prepared. I'm hoping you already have water. I'm hoping you already have everything that you need. But if you need to run out, get snacks, get batteries, get gas, now would be the perfect time to do so, because these ensembles are getting closer and closer to Tallahassee with every model run. We very well could be dealing with a landfalling major hurricane very close to us here in the Big Bend. So all the spaghetti models are showing pretty tight consensus on this storm working its way closer and closer. And with the water vapor in the cone, we're again looking at a Big Bend to Panhandle impact with this. And there's plenty of above 80-degree water to keep this storm going and keep it strengthening as it approaches Florida and the Big Bend. So now I'm going to pass off to Robert, who's going to give a little bit more information on how these storms can form and get strengthened.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. Of course, again, a dangerous storm we're watching here, not just for Tallahassee, but the whole Big Bend area. So we'll have to watch that according to the next few days. So right now, these tropical ingredients we're watching here, the water temperature above 80 degrees, the converging winds that force air upwards, these things help the storm form. And you have water temperature above 80 degrees again, yes, of course. So these things are very important. You also have abundant moisture for this storm. That does help develop that moisture. And when you have all these ingredients together, really does help for all of these things to come together and form a strong, very strong hurricane. So again, right now, abundant moisture, converging winds that force that air upwards, and water temperature above 80 degrees. But you need one more thing. Upper level winds blowing in roughly the same direction as the storm, because if it's not the same direction, the problem is you will still have a lot of shear in this storm that will sort of tear it apart from that center circulation. So you really need all these 4 ingredients there, and that is really essential for the development of that storm. So how do we measure how strong a storm is? So on the Saffir-Simpson scale, we have 5 levels, and it's according to how the wind speed is. So it's not developed just with everything in mind, only the wind speed. So for example, a Category 1 will be 74 to 95 miles per hour, Category 2 will be 96 to 110, and a Category 3 will be 111 to 130 miles per hour, and then from up there, Category 4 and 5. So all of these levels show you just sort of how intense a storm could be. I'm going to leave it here at a Cat 3 because that is our current projection for its landfall in somewhere in the Big Bend. And what a Category 3 type storm is, of course, it has those really strong winds, but the storm surge is really going to be a bit of an impact here. And that's going to 9 to 12 feet at some points in the Big Bend area, very marshy just southeast of Tallahassee. That could cause major problems. That's why there's a storm surge warning and mandatory evacuations for part of Wakulla County, part of a lot of the sort of coastal counties here in the Tallahassee area. So you don't want to be anywhere near the coast when this storm makes its way through the area. But don't focus on just the winds. Other impacts could happen from these storms as well. You can have sustained power outages, even with a Category 1 or a tropical storm, but now with a Category 3, it's going to impact even more power lines, more trees, and you could see more widespread power outages. But just to show you what that storm surge is, you have wind speed going from the east to the west, and it causes a lot of storm surge to come from that normal sea level up into these houses, and it can very heavily impact them. So very important things to consider there with all of these storms. Of course, important to consider that at the end of the day, we do have a very strong storm making its way towards Tallahassee. So some key points here. Again, stay weather aware, watch for NHC updates on this storm, make sure you take action. You still only have about 15 hours, before this storm makes its way here. So stock up on supplies and evaluate evacuation routes before this storm gets here. You only have, again, this really afternoon into the early evening time frame. Once we get to around that 6 p.m., you'll start to see those stronger winds make its way towards Tallahassee. And then again, listen to local officials when deciding to evacuate. So these are all important things here to consider for this storm. We will keep you updated throughout the rest of the afternoon and evening here and into tomorrow as Hurricane Idalia continues to impact the Big Bend.